The sky above Zareth Prime was a seething canvas of fire and ash, torn open by the relentless fury of war. Faint embers floated like dying stars through the air, their glow casting fleeting warmth on the cold desolation below. Lieutenant Cale Brandt crouched low, his breath muffled by the rebreather clinging to his face. The acrid stench of scorched metal and flesh clung to everything, a grim reminder of the price of victory, if one dared call this place victorious. Cale moved with practiced caution, his boots pressing soundlessly into the blackened soil. The ruins loomed around him, jagged remnants of what had once been towering spires of Kalari ingenuity. Now, they jutted upward like broken ribs, their glassy surfaces reflecting the eerie red glow of the horizon. His orders were simple: scour the battlefield for survivors. His motivation, however, was less clear, even to himself. Perhaps it was the gnawing sense of futility that plagued him after years of conflict. Perhaps it was the faint, foolish hope of finding something worth saving. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant groans of settling rubble. Kyle's pulse quickened as he approached a shattered archway, its alien carvings half erased by the violence of plasma fire. He raised his rifle, scanning for movement, but the readout on his visor was stubbornly blank. Yet, there it was, a faint vibration beneath his boots, as though the earth itself breathed unevenly. He stepped through the archway and into what must have once been a grand plaza. Now it was a graveyard, littered with debris and the lifeless forms of Kalari soldiers. Their ornate armor, once radiant with hues of gold and obsidian, was dull and cracked. Cale's gaze swept over them, lingering on the way their elongated limbs and delicate, almost insect-like features seemed so still, so alien in death. And then he saw her. At first she seemed like another corpse, a figure draped in torn fabric, slumped against the remnants of a massive obelisk. But there was something off. Her posture was too poised, too deliberate. A soft wind caught the edges of her veil, lifting it just enough for Kyle to catch a glimpse of luminous silver eyes, half closed but watching. Kyle froze. The woman's gaze locked onto his, and in that moment, the world seemed to narrow. "Human," she whispered, her voice low and melodic, carrying a weight that belied her fragile appearance. Kyle tightened his grip on his rifle, instincts honed over years of combat screaming at him to act, but she didn't move. She simply stared at him, her silver eyes unblinking, her chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. "Who are you?" Kyle demanded, his voice rough and edged with suspicion. Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "I am Elunara," she said, her voice faltering, as though the effort of speaking was a battle in itself. "And you, soldier, are late." Kyle frowned, his visor scanning her for weapons, for anything that might explain her cryptic words. The readout showed nothing threatening, but something about her sent a chill down his spine. He stepped closer, cautiously, the barrel of his rifle trained on her center mass. "Late for what?" he asked, his voice sharp. Her head tilted slightly, the motion almost imperceptible. "Late to decide," she murmured. A sharp crack rang out from the distance, the sound of a falling beam somewhere in the ruins. Kyle's head snapped toward the noise, his body instinctively pivoting into a defensive stance. When he turned back to Elunara, she was standing. It wasn't possible. One moment she'd been slumped, barely able to speak. The next she was upright, her bearing regal despite her tattered attire. Her movements were fluid, almost too graceful, like a predator sizing up its prey. Cale's rifle twitched upward, and his finger hovered over the trigger. "I mean you no harm," she said softly, raising her hands. "But harm will come, nonetheless." Cale's visor flared red, warning him of an incoming signal. A split second later, he heard it. The faint hum of engines overhead. His gaze shot skyward, and there they were, sleek black ships descending like vultures, their forms unmistakably Kalari. "Damn it," Kyle muttered. His rifle lowered instinctively as he turned toward cover, but a cold, delicate hand gripped his arm. He spun to face her, startled by her strength. "You cannot run," Elunara said, her voice firm now. "They are not here for you. They are here for me." Kale yanked his arm free, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Then give me one good reason I shouldn't leave you to them," he snapped. Her silver eyes bored into his, and for a moment he thought he saw something flicker behind them. Fear, desperation, and something else. "Because," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if they take me, this war will never end." The hum of the ships grew louder, their shadows slicing across the ruins. Kyle hesitated, the weight of her words sinking into him like a stone. Before he could respond, Elunara took a step closer, her expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "I have nothing left," she said, her voice trembling now. "No kingdom, no army, no future. Only this one chance." Kale swallowed hard, his instincts at war with his gut. He didn't know what game she was playing, but her desperation was real, and in this moment on this broken battlefield, he realized he didn't have the heart to abandon her. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "But you'd better explain everything, and fast." The ships were almost upon them now, their engines roaring like angry gods. Elunara's lips parted, and she uttered the words that would haunt Kyle for the rest of his days. "First, you must trust me. Second, I need to be your wife, human." The sanctuary Kale had chosen was no sanctuary at all, just a half-buried transport hub on the outskirts of the ruined city. Its once sleek walls, made of Kalari crystalline alloys, now bore scorch marks and deep fissures from orbital bombardments. The main chamber was dim, lit only by the pale glow of an emergency panel flickering weakly against the far wall. It hummed with a low, constant vibration, proof that some systems still clung to life beneath the devastation. Kale leaned against the bulkhead, his rifle propped beside him. His gaze flickered between the entrance, where shadows danced in the fading light, and Elunara, who sat cross-legged on a fractured console. Her veil was gone now, revealing more of her angular, almost ethereal features. The silver of her eyes seemed brighter in the gloom, catching even the faintest glimmers of light. She had barely spoken since they escaped the ships, and Kale had not pressed her. Instead, he focused on scanning the area for any signs of pursuit. His visor's readout remained stubbornly clear, yet his gut told him it wouldn't stay that way for long. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've got about 30 seconds before I start demanding answers," he said, his tone sharper than intended. Elunara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. 30 seconds will not suffice," she replied evenly. Kale exhaled long and slow, running a hand through his ash-streaked hair. "Fine," he muttered. "Start with the basics. Who are those ships and why are they after you?" Her gaze shifted, as though she were watching something far beyond the confines of the transport hub. "They are Kalari," she said softly, "but they do not serve my people. Not anymore." Kyle frowned. "That's not an answer." "It is the truth," she countered, her voice carrying a faint edge. "They are hunters, soldiers of an empire fractured by ambition and despair. Once, they would have bowed before my house. Now, they seek my blood to legitimize their own rule." Kale studied her closely, the weight of her words settling in his mind. "Your royalty," he said, though it sounded more like an accusation than an observation. Elunara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was," she admitted. "Before the war. Before—" She trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Kale leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "So, what's the deal with this wife nonsense?" Her gaze snapped back to him, sharp and piercing. "It is not nonsense," she said, her tone suddenly fierce. "It is survival. Among my people, a widow's title and power become void unless she forms a new bond. Without such a bond, I am expendable. To them I am a prize, a symbol to claim, a tool to wield." Kale's brow furrowed. The idea of marriage as a matter of politics and survival wasn't entirely foreign. Human history was littered with similar customs, but the stakes she described were staggering. "And you think bonding with me will fix that?" he asked, incredulous. Her expression softened, though her voice remained steady. "You are an outsider," she said. "A soldier without ties to my world's factions. To bond with you is to sever their claim on me. It is imperfect, but it is my only chance to remain free." Kyle shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "This is insane," he muttered. "Even if I believed you, even if I agreed, how would that work? You're—" He stopped short, unsure how to phrase the obvious. "Alien?" she finished for him, her tone laced with faint amusement. "Yeah," Kale admitted. Elunara's silver eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something hurt crossing her face before it vanished. "The bond is not physical," she explained. "It is symbolic, a melding of purpose, acknowledged by our traditions. It would not require what you fear." Kale opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of distant voices stopped him cold. His head whipped toward the entrance, his rifle snapping to his shoulder. "We've got company," he said tersely. Elunara slid off the console with an eerie grace, her movements as fluid as flowing water. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "Not Kalari," she whispered. Kyle squinted, his visor's sensors struggling to identify the newcomers. A moment later, 3 figures emerged from the shadows, human scavengers, their armor mismatched and worn, their weapons crude but functional. "Looks like we're not the only ones digging through the ruins," Kyle muttered, lowering his rifle slightly but keeping it ready. The leader of the scavengers, a burly man with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward. "Didn't think we'd find anyone alive out here," he said, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "You military?" Kale nodded, keeping his tone neutral. "Something like that." The scavenger's gaze shifted to Elunara, his cybernetic eye whirring faintly. "And her?" he asked, his voice colder now. Kale's grip on his rifle tightened. "None of your concern," he said evenly. The tension in the room thickened as the scavengers exchanged glances. The leader's lips twisted into a smirk. "Everything out here is our concern, soldier," he said, "including whatever secrets your friend is hiding." Kyle stepped forward, his stance firm. "Walk away," he said, his voice low and dangerous. For a moment, it seemed like the scavengers might push the issue. But then Elunara spoke, her voice calm and commanding. "This world is dead," she said. "You will find nothing here but ghosts." The scavengers hesitated, unease flickering in their eyes. The leader muttered a curse under his breath, then gestured for his crew to retreat. "We'll see about that," he said, his tone grudging. "Good luck, soldier. You'll need it." As the scavengers disappeared into the ruins, Kyle turned to Elunara, his expression a mixture of frustration and awe. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. Elunara met his gaze steadily. "A reminder," she said softly, "that not all threats come from the sky." Kyle didn't respond, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the puzzle before him. The setting, the rules, the alliances, they were all a tangled web, and at its center stood this enigmatic woman who seemed to hold more secrets than she let on. As the last echoes of the scavengers' retreat faded, Kale realized one thing with certainty. Whatever game he'd been drawn into, it was far from over. The air in the ruins grew heavier, charged with the oppressive weight of what was coming. Kale paced the perimeter of the transport hub, every nerve on edge. His visor readout continued to blink clear, but he knew better than to trust it. The scavengers might not have been a threat this time, but they'd broadcast their position to anyone within range, and Kale didn't believe in coincidences. Behind him, Elunara stood near the fractured console, her silver eyes tracing the faint symbols etched into its surface. Her fingers brushed the alien script with a reverence that unsettled him. She hadn't spoken since the scavengers left, and the silence between them had grown taut, fraying Kale's patience. "You gonna tell me what you're looking for, or should I guess?" Kale asked, stopping mid-stride to glare at her. Her gaze lifted to meet his, calm and unyielding. This station was once a nexus, she said. A hub of knowledge and connection. If anything remains of its archives, it could guide us. Guide us where? Kyle demanded, his voice rising. You keep talking in riddles. You want me to trust you? Start giving me some straight answers. Elunara tilted her head, her expression almost curious. And if I told you everything, soldier, would you truly believe me? Kale hesitated, her words striking a nerve. Trust wasn't something he gave easily. Not anymore. But her cryptic responses and half-truths were wearing thin. Before he could respond, the console beneath her hands flickered to life. A low hum filled the chamber, and faint holographic projections began to materialize. Maps of Zirath Prime, fragmented star charts, and lines of text in the flowing Kalari script floated in the air, glowing faintly blue. Elunara stepped back, her eyes scanning the projections with rapid precision. Kyle approached cautiously, his rifle slung over his shoulder. What is this? A fragment, Elunara murmured. A glimpse of what was lost. One of the holograms shifted, displaying a series of glowing points across the map of the planet. Kyle's visor translated the Kalari text, identifying them as locations of interest, energy sources, remnants of infrastructure, and something marked as sovereign protocol access. Before Kale could ask, Elunara's hand hovered over the last label, her expression hardening. This is what we need, she said. Kale frowned. And why is that? Because it is the key to ending this war, she replied. He didn't miss the way her voice trembled, just slightly, as though the weight of her words threatened to crush her. Their conversation was cut short by a sharp, piercing tone that echoed through the chamber. Kale's visor flared red, detecting movement above ground, multiple contacts converging fast. His instincts screamed danger. They found us, he growled, grabbing his rifle. Elunara moved to his side, her composure unshaken. We must leave, she said. Now. Kyle didn't argue. He gestured toward the far corridor, the only viable exit that didn't lead directly to the surface. This way, he barked, and they sprinted into the darkened passage. The corridor was narrow and winding, its walls slick with condensation and age. The faint hum of the facility's failing systems reverberated around them. Kyle took point, his rifle's light cutting through the darkness, while Elunara followed close behind, her movements eerily quiet. Behind them, the first echoes of pursuit began, a low, rhythmic thud that Kale recognized as Kalari combat walkers. Their pace quickened. Explain something to me, Kale said between breaths. Why is this sovereign protocol so damn important? Elunara's voice came from just behind him, calm despite their flight. It is a failsafe, she said. A command system designed to override Kalari war directives. It was created to prevent exactly what has come to pass, endless conflict. With it, I can stop them. Kale's jaw clenched. That's a hell of a lot to put on a maybe, lady. They rounded a corner, and Kale skidded to a halt. The corridor opened into a vast chasm, a broken bridge spanning its width. Below, faint streams of molten rock cast an eerie orange glow that danced across the walls. Damn it, he muttered. No way across. Elunara stepped beside him, her gaze scanning the shattered bridge. Without a word, she placed her hands together, fingers weaving into a complex gesture. A faint blue light began to emanate from her palms. What are you? Kyle started, but his words faltered as the light intensified, forming into a series of shimmering geometric platforms that extended across the chasm. It will hold, Elunara said, stepping onto the first platform with a confidence that Kale found unnerving. Kale hesitated, his instincts at war with the surreal sight before him. The sound of the walkers growing closer decided for him. Muttering a curse, he followed her onto the bridge. The platforms shifted slightly beneath his weight, as though alive, but they held firm. Elunara moved with practiced ease, her steps light and precise. Kale, on the other hand, felt every muscle in his body tense as he balanced himself. Halfway across, the first shots rang out. Bright green energy bolts sizzled past them, striking the far wall with explosive force. Kyle spun, his rifle snapping up as he returned fire. "They're here!" he shouted, firing at the advancing figures on the far side of the chasm. The combat walkers had arrived, their sleek forms gleaming in the light of the molten streams below. Elunara turned, her hands moving in a series of rapid gestures. A translucent barrier of blue light erupted behind them, absorbing the next volley of enemy fire. "Move!" she commanded. Kyle didn't need to be told twice. He pushed forward, covering Elunara as they raced toward the end of the bridge. His rifle barked with precision, dropping one of the advancing Kalari soldiers, but the walkers pressed on, their cannons glowing ominously. They reached the far side just as the first platform began to collapse behind them. Elunara's barrier flickered and failed, and the remaining platforms dissolved into nothingness. Kyle turned, panting, his rifle trained on the ruined bridge. The walkers came to a halt, their pilots seemingly hesitant to follow without a clear path. For now they were safe, but as Kale looked at Elunara, her silver eyes reflecting the molten light below, he knew this was only the beginning. Whatever this sovereign protocol was, it was worth killing for. And if the Kalari wanted it that badly, it was bound to be worth far more than just their lives. The temporary silence that followed their escape from the collapsing bridge was anything but comforting. Kyle's breaths came in shallow bursts as he crouched behind a jagged outcrop of rock, his rifle still trained on the ruins of the bridge behind them. No movement. The walkers had retreated, but not far enough to allow for true relief. "We can't stay here," Kyle said, glancing over his shoulder at Elunara. She stood a few paces away, her silver eyes fixed on the jagged corridor ahead. Her calm unnerved him, but he was beginning to understand it wasn't apathy, it was resolve. "No," she agreed softly. "We cannot." Cal pushed himself to his feet, his muscles aching. "Then lead the way, Your Highness." The title was sharp, almost mocking, but Elunara didn't rise to the bait. She simply turned and began to walk, her steps purposeful but measured, as though she were navigating a place she had memorized long ago. The corridor stretched onward, its walls narrowing the deeper they went. Faint, bioluminescent growths clung to the surfaces, casting a cold, pale light. Kyle kept his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning every shadow. "You still haven't told me what happens when we get to this sovereign protocol thing," Kale said. Elunara didn't turn. "Because I do not know," she replied. "Fantastic," Kale muttered under his breath. They pressed on in silence, the oppressive atmosphere of the passageway gnawing at Kale's nerves. It wasn't until they reached a wide, circular chamber that he allowed himself to relax, if only slightly. The chamber was massive, its walls etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. In the center stood a tall obelisk, its surface made of the same crystalline alloy as the Kalari ships. Elunara approached the obelisk, her fingers brushing its surface. The glow intensified at her touch, and the chamber trembled faintly. "What is this?" Kyle asked, his voice echoing in the vast space. "A marker," Elunara said. "A waypoint." Before Kyle could press her further, the obelisk emitted a soft chime, and a section of the floor began to shift. A platform rose from the ground, revealing a console covered in symbols and glowing glyphs. Elunara knelt before it, her hands moving quickly over the interface. "This will guide us to the sovereign protocol," she explained. Kyle frowned. "And you're sure it's still intact, after everything this planet's been through?" Elunara's movements paused, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. "No," she admitted, "but we have no other choice." Kyle sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Let's just hope the Kalari haven't beaten us to it." As if summoned by his words, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. Kyle's rifle snapped up, his visor scanning for threats. The tremor subsided quickly, but it left behind a chilling silence. "What was that?" Kyle asked, his voice tight. Elunara rose to her feet, her expression unreadable. Not the Kalari, she said softly. Before Kale could respond, a new sound filled the chamber, a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The light in the room dimmed, and the symbols on the obelisk began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. "Elunara," Kale said warily. "What's happening?" She didn't answer. Her attention was fixed on the obelisk, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear or recognition. The hum grew louder, and then, without warning, a figure materialized in the center of the chamber. It was humanoid, but distinctly alien, its body composed of a translucent, shimmering substance that seemed to flow like liquid glass. Its eyes glowed with an intense, piercing light. Kyle's rifle was up in an instant. "Friend of yours?" he asked, his finger hovering over the trigger. Elunara didn't respond. She took a step forward, her voice low and trembling. "It cannot be," she whispered. The figure turned its gaze toward her, and its voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "Elunara Velthar, you are far from where you belong." Kyle glanced between them, his confusion mounting. "You know this thing?" Elunara didn't look at him. "It is an archivist," she said, "a guardian of the old knowledge. They were all destroyed when the war began." "Clearly not all," Kyle muttered. The archivist's gaze shifted to Kyle, and he felt an unnatural pressure weigh down on him, as if the creature's very presence was probing his thoughts. "And this human, what purpose does he serve?" Elunara straightened, her composure returning. "He is my ally," she said firmly, "and you will not harm him." The archivist's expression didn't change. It had no discernible features beyond its glowing eyes, but its voice carried a note of skepticism. "You speak of alliances, yet your presence here betrays your purpose. You seek the sovereign protocol." "Yes," Elunara said. The archivist's gaze bore into her. "And do you truly believe you are worthy of wielding it?" Kale's grip on his rifle tightened. "Worthy? What's that supposed to mean?" The archivist ignored him. "The protocol is not merely a tool, Elunara Velthar. It is a burden, a power that demands sacrifice. Are you prepared for what it will cost you?" Elunara hesitated, her confidence faltering. "I must end this war," she said, "whatever the cost." The archivist's form shimmered, and the chamber trembled once more. "Then you shall see," it said. "But know this, the path you have chosen will lead not to salvation, but to ruin." Before Kale could react, the archivist vanished, leaving behind only silence and the faint glow of the obelisk. "What the hell just happened?" Kyle demanded, his voice echoing in the empty chamber. Elunara didn't answer. She stared at the console, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time since they met, she looked vulnerable, lost. Kyle stepped closer, his tone softening. "Elunara, talk to me. What did it mean?" She turned to him, her silver eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, doubt. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I fear we are no longer the only ones seeking the protocol." The weight of her words settled heavily between them, and Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever game they were playing, the stakes had just been raised, and the cost of failure was becoming frighteningly clear. The hours following the archivist's warning stretched into a haze of tense silence. Kale and Elunara trudged deeper into the labyrinthine passages beneath Zerath Prime's scorched surface, each step a reminder of the enormity of what lay ahead. The narrow corridors seemed alive, their faintly glowing walls pulsing with an almost imperceptible rhythm, as though the planet itself had a heartbeat. Kale kept his rifle at the ready, its weight an anchor against the growing unease in his chest. The archivist's words gnawed at him. "The path you have chosen will lead not to salvation, but to ruin." What did it mean by that? He asked finally, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. Elunara, walking a few paces ahead, didn't turn. The archivists were designed to protect knowledge, but they were not without biases, she said. Her tone was measured, but Kale didn't miss the faint tremor in her voice. Their warnings are riddles, meant to challenge resolve. Nothing more. Kale frowned. That didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like a threat. It does not matter, Elinara said sharply, her pace quickening. The Sovereign Protocol is our only chance to end this war. To hesitate now is to condemn countless lives. Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction, but Kale wasn't convinced. He quickened his steps to walk beside her, studying her face. Her usual calm veneer had cracked, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. "You're scared," he said bluntly. Elunara's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment her expression softened. "I am," she admitted, "but fear is not a luxury I can afford." Kyle nodded, respecting her honesty, but the unease in his chest didn't abate. The path finally opened into a vast subterranean chamber, its scale so immense that the ceiling was lost to darkness. Towering spires of crystalline alloy jutted from the ground, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly blue. The air was heavy with the hum of ancient machinery, and Kale's visor struggled to make sense of the readings flooding his HUD. "This is it," Elunara said, her voice barely above a whisper. At the center of the chamber stood a massive, monolithic structure, its surface shimmering as though alive. Lines of light pulsed across it in rhythmic patterns, converging on a single point near its apex. Kyle whistled softly. "Impressive. So what now?" Elunara didn't answer immediately. She approached the monolith, her movements slow and deliberate, as though she were approaching an altar. Her hands hovered over its surface, and the glowing lines shifted in response, forming symbols that Kale couldn't begin to decipher. "This is the interface," she said, "the gateway to the protocol." Kale frowned. "And how do you plan to access it? Just tap in your royal password and hope for the best?" Elunara turned to him, her expression grave. "Accessing the protocol requires more than codes or knowledge. It requires proof of worthiness." "Worthiness," Kyle repeated, his skepticism clear. "And how exactly do you prove that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "By confronting the protocol's trials." Kyle shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're really leaning into this whole cryptic mystic thing, aren't you? What trials? What happens if you fail?" Elunara's silence was answer enough. Before Kale could press her further, the ground beneath them trembled. The glow of the monolith intensified, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, its tone neither mechanical nor organic. "Initiate recognized. State your purpose." Elunara stepped forward, her voice steady. "I seek the Sovereign Protocol to end the war that has consumed my people and threatened this galaxy." The voice paused as though considering her words. "The protocol is a burden, not a weapon. To wield it is to accept its cost. Do you accept this responsibility?" "I do," Elunara said without hesitation. The voice hummed in approval, or perhaps warning. "The trial will begin. You will face the weight of your choices. Should you falter, you will be unmade." Kyle's grip on his rifle tightened. "Wait, what does that mean? Unmade?" The chamber began to change. The spires of crystal dissolved into light, the walls and floor melting away into an endless void. Kyle and Elunara stood alone, suspended in a space that defied comprehension. "Elunara!" Kyle shouted, but she didn't respond. Her form began to shift, splitting into two indistinct figures. One shimmered with an aura of light, the other cloaked in shadow. They moved independently, mirroring each other but acting as opposites. The voice returned, colder now. "To claim the protocol, you must confront the truths you hide. You must choose the path forward and accept its cost." Kyle tried to move toward her, but an invisible force held him back. He was a spectator, powerless to intervene. Elunara's light form double spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You seek peace, but your actions sow destruction. How can you claim to end the war when you are willing to sacrifice so much to do so? the shadowed figure countered, its voice a harsh whisper. Peace is an illusion. Survival requires strength. Are you willing to destroy your enemies, even at the cost of your soul? Elunara stood between them, her expression stricken. The scene shifted again, and Kale found himself standing on a battlefield. Bodies littered the ground, human and Kalari alike. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the sky burned with fire. "Elunara!" he shouted, but she was gone. The voice boomed once more. "The trial is hers alone, but the consequences will be shared. Prepare yourself, human. The path she chooses will bind you both." Kyle's blood ran cold. Whatever this trial was, he was as much a part of it as she was, and the outcome would shape their fates in ways he couldn't begin to predict. He clenched his rifle, scanning the battlefield. If he couldn't help her directly, he'd do what he did best, survive, and he'd be damned if he let some ancient cryptic force dictate his destiny without a fight. For now, all he could do was wait and hope that Elunara's resolve was as unyielding as it seemed, because the stakes were no longer just about ending a war. They were about preserving what little humanity they had left. Kyle's breath came in shallow bursts as he trudged across the phantom battlefield. The bodies, shattered, burnt, lifeless, were illusions, he told himself. But the coppery tang of blood on the wind and the crunch of debris underfoot were too vivid to dismiss. Above him, the sky churned in violent hues of red and black, as though the heavens themselves were at war. "Elunara!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the roar of distant explosions. She was nowhere to be seen, but her trial wasn't over. Kyle gritted his teeth. He couldn't see her, couldn't reach her, but he could feel her. It was a strange sensation, like a thread pulling at his chest, taut and quivering, leading him forward through the chaos. As he pressed on, the battlefield began to shift. The ground beneath him rippled, the bodies dissolving into streams of light that rose into the air like fireflies. The oppressive sky melted away, replaced by a vast, infinite void. At its center stood a platform of pure light, and on it, Elunara knelt, her head bowed. "Elunara." She lifted her head slowly, her silver eyes meeting his. But something was wrong. Her expression was hollow, her face pale. Around her, two towering figures loomed, one bathed in blinding light, the other cloaked in shadow. "Kale." Her voice was a whisper, filled with exhaustion. He stepped onto the platform, the invisible weight of the void pressing against his chest. The figures turned toward him, their features unreadable, yet he felt their scrutiny like a physical force. The voice of the protocol filled the space, cold and impassive. "She has chosen to face her trial. And now, you are bound by her choice." Kale's grip tightened on his rifle. "What does that mean? What have you done to her?" The shadowed figure spoke first, its voice a rasp that slithered into Kale's ears. "She seeks the sovereign protocol, the power to end the war. But to wield it, one must pay the price. And the price is steep," the light-drenched figure intoned, its voice resonant and unyielding. "It is the sacrifice of what she holds most dear." Kyle turned to Elunara, his jaw tightening. "What are they talking about? What's the price?" She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Kyle, it is the only way. The protocol will demand something irrevocable. I must offer a piece of myself, or someone I trust." Kyle's blood turned to ice. "A piece of yourself? Or someone you trust? Elunara, that's insane." Her gaze snapped back to him, fierce and desperate. "And what alternative do we have? Another century of bloodshed? Entire planets scorched to ash? If this war continues, there will be nothing left to save." Kyle shook his head, his voice rising. "You think you're the only one who's lost people? You think this war hasn't already taken everything from me too? But I didn't sign up to be sacrificed, Elunara. Not for you, not for some ancient power that might not even work." The figures shifted, their forms rippling like heat waves. The voice of the protocol cut through their argument. "The time has come. Choose, Elunara Veltar. Will you offer your essence, or the bond you share with this human. Elunara's hands clenched at her sides, her expression twisted with anguish. Don't do this, Kale said, his voice softening. There has to be another way. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I wish there were, she whispered. Kale took a step closer, his voice firm. Then we'll find it. Together. But not like this. The light-drenched figure spoke, its tone severe. To deny the price is to forfeit the protocol. The war will rage on, unending. And the blood will be on your hands, the shadowed figure hissed. Kale turned on them, his anger boiling over. And whose hands will it be on if she goes through with this? Yours? Or are you both just ghosts, feeding off the pain of people who are desperate enough to listen to you? The protocol's voice silenced them. The decision belongs to her. Elunara rose to her feet, her trembling hands curling into fists. Enough, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She turned to Kyle, her silver eyes searching his. You've given me more than I deserved, your loyalty, your strength, and your trust. Elunara. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. But this is my burden to bear, not yours. Before Kale could stop her, she turned to the figures and spoke with quiet resolve. Take my essence, leave him. The platform trembled, and the figures began to merge, their forms coalescing into a single entity of blinding, shifting light. The protocol's voice filled the void. It is done. A beam of light shot from the entity, striking Elunara in the chest. She gasped, her body convulsing as the light enveloped her. Kyle lunged forward, but an invisible force held him back, his cries lost in the roar of the energy surrounding her. When the light finally subsided, Elunara collapsed to the ground. Kyle rushed to her side, his heart pounding. Elunara! She stirred weakly, her skin pale and her eyes dim. Kyle? He cradled her in his arms, his throat tight. What did they do to you? Her lips curved into a faint smile. They took a part of me, but the protocol, it's ours now. As if in response, the entity dissolved, leaving behind a glowing orb that floated toward Elunara. It pulsed with a quiet power, then sank into her chest, its light merging with her own. Kyle held her close, his mind racing. The war might end now, but at what cost? As the chamber began to dissolve around them, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was anything but complete. The sovereign protocol was theirs, but the sacrifices they'd made to claim it had left scars that would never fully heal. The sovereign protocol was a quiet thing, despite the grandeur of its revelation. Kale expected more, a burst of energy, a tremor through the fabric of reality, a proclamation of triumph, but all it left was a faint hum in the air, and the sight of Elunara, her hand over her chest where the light had entered. The battlefield they'd stood upon dissolved, leaving only a quiet expanse of gray beneath their feet. The protocol's chamber was gone, replaced by an endless horizon that felt less like a place and more like a memory. Cal sat beside her, his pulse finally beginning to slow. He didn't know how much time had passed since the protocol's judgment, only that Elunara hadn't moved since. Her breathing was steady, but her stillness unnerved him. Elunara, he said softly, touching her shoulder. Are you still here? Her eyes fluttered open, duller now, the luminous silver dimmed to the color of old steel. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him. But then she exhaled a slow breath, and her gaze sharpened. Kyle, she murmured, her voice hoarse. He managed a small smile, relief washing over him. Yeah, it's me, still kicking. She sat up slowly, her movements deliberate as though every muscle ached. The protocol. I can feel it, she said, her hand still resting over her chest. It's part of me now. Kyle leaned back, watching her closely. And what does that mean? For you, for the war, for... He gestured vaguely, unsure how to encompass the enormity of what had just transpired. Elunara's lips pressed into a thin line. It means we have a chance. The protocol holds the codes, the blueprints, and the knowledge needed to dismantle the weaponry that has kept this war alive for so long. It's a blueprint for peace, but it's also a double-edged blade. Kale's brow furrowed. A blade? She nodded. It can end the war, yes, but in the wrong hands, it could reshape the galaxy into something far worse. Her words hung in the air like a fragile glass pane, ready to shatter. Kyle rubbed the back of his neck, the weight of what they'd claimed settling heavily on him. So, what happens now? The return to Zirath Prime was eerily uneventful. The labyrinth of tunnels they'd navigated before was now a straight path, the labyrinth's defenses seemingly silenced by the protocol's activation. They emerged into a dawn tinged red by the ash-heavy skies, the remnants of battles still lingering in the air. Waiting for them was a single Kalari ship, its sleek, organic design a stark contrast to the jagged human vessels Kale was used to. A lone figure stood outside it, Elunara's closest remaining ally, Commander Varith, who knelt as they approached. "My sovereign," Varith said, her voice trembling with reverence. Elunara hesitated before responding, her gaze flicking to Kale. "That title feels hollow now." "You still hold their future," Varith replied, rising to her feet. "They will follow you. They always have." Kale didn't miss the way Elunara's shoulders stiffened, as though the weight of leadership had grown heavier in her absence. The journey back to neutral space was subdued, the ship's corridors silent, save for the occasional hum of its engines. Elunara spent much of it alone, standing before the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the stars as though searching for something lost. Kyle found her there on their final day aboard, leaning against the cool glass. "You've been quiet," he said, stepping beside her. She didn't look at him, her voice barely audible. "I keep thinking about what comes next, about whether I'll be strong enough to see it through." Kyle crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "You're strong enough, Elunara. You've proven that 100 times over." She turned to him, her expression softening. "And you? What will you do now?" The question caught him off guard. For so long, his purpose had been clear: fight, survive, repeat. But now, the idea of a galaxy without war, without the constant pressure of survival, felt alien. "I guess I'll figure it out," he said with a shrug. "One step at a time." Elunara smiled faintly, the first genuine one he'd seen in what felt like days. "You always did have a knack for adaptability." Their arrival at the neutral hub station was met with muted fanfare, the kind that spoke of a fragile hope rather than victory. News of the protocol's recovery spread quickly, and delegations from both sides began arriving within hours. Kyle watched from the sidelines as Elunara addressed the gathered leaders, her voice steady and commanding despite the weariness in her frame. She spoke of the war's devastation, of the possibility of peace, and of the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. For the first time, Kale saw her not as the grieving widow he'd met in the ruins of a battlefield, but as the leader her people needed. When the discussions began in earnest, Kale slipped away, finding solace in the quiet corners of the station. He wasn't built for politics, for grand speeches and delicate negotiations. His role in this was over, or so he thought. Elunara found him later, standing on one of the observation platforms, a bottle of synthesized whiskey in hand. "You're leaving," she said, not a question, but a statement. Kyle sighed, tipping the bottle back for a long sip. "Yeah, this isn't my fight anymore, you've got this." She stepped closer, her presence warm against the station's cold air. "I could use your counsel, your honesty." "And what would a soldier like me know about diplomacy?" he asked with a wry smile. Elunara didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "You remind me what we're fighting for. That matters." Kyle studied her, the way the light caught the silver strands in her hair, the way her eyes, though dimmer now, still held a spark of determination. He didn't know what their future held, but for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Raising the bottle in a mock toast, he grinned. Well, I guess I can stick around a little longer. Elunara's laugh was quiet, but it carried a warmth that promised better days ahead. And as the stars stretched out before them, infinite and unknowable, Kyle allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could heal.